In December 2024, there will be yet another rework to Cult Ambush. Certainly not for the first time. In the last year, there have been 4 versions of Cult Ambush. The base index version that was overpowered, you got a new unit and Cult Ambush marker on a 4+, and you added 3 if the unit was a battle line unit, so neophytes and acolytes always came back. In September 2023, that was revised down to a more sensible units return on a 5+, with a +1 if battle line and another +1 in the first 2 battle rounds. When the codex released in summer, we got rid of the battle line bonus part and your units were considered to be in reserves, which caused many arguments over what kind of reserves and could you use rapid ingress. You couldn't, and there has been an FAQ confirming it, but that didn't stop the World Championships of Warhammer tournament ruling that you could. So if you bought the codex, that printed version is not used in 40k games anymore and has probably been the worst version of Cult Ambush. Cult Ambush changed yet again in August 2024 to say that if you have a unit come back through Cult Ambush, you don't need to use the Cult Ambush markers, you can deep strike if you can deep strike. Sort of deep strike. Which made the Cult Ambush markers merely free rapid ingress tokens, much like the teleport homers of Space Marine Terminators. There have since been more FAQs and clarifications about things like tunnel crawlers. You can use tunnel crawlers, which as a stratagem specifies that you are deep striking, but Cult Ambush on your turn uses rules similar to deep strike, can only be done by units with deep strike, but isn't deep strike. Yet here we have Games Workshop saying, yes, you can use stratagems that specify deploying via deep strike, but not rapid ingress. That line about being in reserves is gone, which also means that your units in Cult Ambush are not destroyed if not deployed by the end of Battle Round 3. So in December, we can look forward to another revision of the rule, the 5th full change in 15 months. Aren't we lucky? Genestealer Cult players have never had this level of attention before, and I'm not sure if I like it. So in this video, I'll be covering what will likely happen to Genestealer Cult in December, what is happening to the Genestealer Cult in the meta right now, and announce the winner of a giveaway that began 2 weeks ago. I know that was an Adept Sororitas video for a prize that is for Adept Sororitas or Imperial Agents, but this is just how the chips fall. So first, I have to ask you what you think about the changes to Cult Ambush that we know are coming. Do you think that they will just tidy up the rule to follow the October FAQs? That is option A. Will they put another minor change to some part of the rule? Option B. Or do something closer to a full rework of the Codex rules? Option C. Please do put A, B or C as a comment before I try and convince you that the answer will most likely be C. Even if that isn't what Games Workshop does, it is what they should do. Part of that comes down to how the Genestealer Cult are in the meta right now. We are doing very well. We are the top of a lot of win rate charts. We're not winning every tournament, but winning lots of games. The Genestealer Cult still has a very small player base. It's a lot of models to start an army. And without the previous Combat Patrol box, it's an expensive army to start. So a part of the reason we're not winning lots of tournaments is you can't win a tournament for the Genestealer Cult if no Genestealer Cult players enter that tournament. Reports are seeing things like a high 58% win rate in November, which is higher than any other faction or sub-faction, but that is coming from those small number of best players, the best faction players. Genestealer Cult is still a very difficult army for casual players. You have to get into a totally different mindset of how you play, something we're going to come onto. And the Genestealer Cult scores went up, not after the change to the Cult Ambush in August to allow you to deep strike, but from the big points drop to a lot of units in October. Having a unit come back on a 5+ is still a really bad ability, as your army rule may not work at all during the game, or randomly may be incredibly OP, as opponents of Genestealer Cult are now playing something closer to 3,000 points in a 2,000 point game. Most of the detachments are doing really well, but they're doing so with common tactics. Well, common tactics among all of them. The Genestealer Jail. This is where you pin your enemy in their deployment zone, Keep up board control on your side, stop them from scoring victory points, and it doesn't matter how many of your units die, or even if they come back, you have the most victory points at the end of the game. In the Outlander Claw, this is done with endurance vehicles and bikes. Looking at the stratagems of the Outlander Claw, a lot of them are about making your units more survivable. -1 damage to vehicles. A 4+ invulnerable save on Ridgerunners or Bikers. Being able to reactive move with Ridgerunners or Bikers. All of these helps keep your units alive. And in this detachment, you have sticky objectives on your Jackal Bikers, and you have double OC on all your mounted and vehicle units. Pair a cult truck with some neophytes, and you have so much objective control that the enemy will not be able to beat you. You keep board control even if all of your units die very quickly. And so long as you prioritize the enemy units that can destroy your vehicles, like the Goliath Rock Grinder, you can keep a really high objective control on some very tough units that the enemy will not be able to shift and not be able to out-objective control. The Outlander Claw has done well in tournaments since the codex, but it needs a very skilled driver to use the less conventional tactics. It doesn't make sense to most players to just move 5 bikes in the way of a very cheap enemy infantry unit that can kill them, which then does go on to kill your Jackal Bikers, more than making their points back. But the Genestealer Cult player is just slowing the enemy, denying them victory points at the cost of a biker unit even if that biker unit doesn't come back. You control the board, you get the victory points, you deny the enemy from getting victory points and scoring secondary missions. You could lose your entire army multiple times over and then be declared the winner at the end of turn 5. That is the common sort of tactic we're seeing. The Biosanctic Broodsurge has also gone up in popularity. It is the combat smash detachment with the heavier hitters of the Aberrants and the Genestealers and anything that you attach a Biophagus to. A small unit of Aberrants got cheaper when there was a points drop, 135 points for 5 rather than 150, whereas it still remains 300 points for a unit of 10. And much like the Index, we're still seeing Aberrants with an Abominant or Biophagus infiltrating up the board, and still lots of Purestrains with them to pull off that Genestealer jail from the start of the game. Purestrains in this detachment get more attacks and +1 to the charge to hold the enemy back right from the start and kill off their utility units. Not their strongest units, not their most combat savvy units, their biggest units, just the ones that are going to be completing secondary missions and primary missions. There has been very little change since I last talked about the meta in a Genestealer Cult video in the past. Xenocreed has seen a boost too. This is the Advance and Charge detachment. I love calling it the Advance and Charge detachment. There's a long video where I go over the Xenocreed in detail, where I do call it the Advance and Charge detachment a lot. It has the speed to lock down the enemy, and it has a lot of infantry units and they can come back more reliably. Sort of. People outside the faction look at the enhancement Deeds That Speak to the Masses in the Xenocreed detachment and think, oh wow, that's amazing, you're getting people back all the time. You could have the worst cult ambush rolls and still get more rolls to have that unit come back. Well, I have played with it a lot, and I have only once got its points back. And even then I would have been fine not getting its points back. It isn't that valuable. It only works on battle line units, it only works on 1 battle line unit per turn, and of course if you pass the cult ambush test, you don't get an extra roll. But this is the enhancement that lots of people who talk about the meta and what tournament people are doing, that never played Genestealer Cult, have maybe never played against Genestealer Cult, will look at that enhancement and go, oh, that's the best, it's amazing, and it's just not that great. And Xenocreed is lagging behind the Outlander Claw and the Biosanctic Broodsurge in terms of win rate. But with the points reduction, the Xenocreed now includes even more infantry, easily over 100 models, making it inviable for a lot of casual collectors. So even if it is really good, not a lot of people are going to be able to play it. Because of the points drop, you have even cheaper acolytes, even cheaper neophytes, the Primus got cheaper, and there was no increase to the metamorph points. The Ridgerunner is also a really big part of all of these lists. The Achilles Ridgerunners had no points increase in October 2024, and they're just a major part of why the army works. To increase the points on the Ridgerunner is to tear down the Genestealer Cult for every detachment and playstyle, and it comes out of their abilities. One enemy unit hit by a Ridgerunner unit is affected by crossfire. Every other Genestealer Cult unit that attacks that same enemy gets +1 AP on their attacks. You may be familiar with similar things on the Adept Roll Castigator or the Imperial Guard Leman Russ. But the Ridgerunner is different. The effect of Crossfire doesn't last until the end of the shooting phase, it is until the end of the turn. So it also applies in the fight phase. So combat-focused Genestealer Cult armies like the Biosanctic Broodsurge also benefit greatly. And with the mortar firing indirectly, this crossfire rule can also be applied out of line of sight. So Purestrain Genestealers can strike at an enemy turn 1 and get this extra AP bonus. It is also applying to other Ridgerunners. So here's a tactic I've seen. A single Ridgerunner with a mortar applies crossfire to an enemy tank out of line of sight. With a Survey Augur as well, this also removes the benefit of cover from that enemy unit. Another unit of Ridgerunners, maybe 2 of them in the same unit or 2 single Ridgerunners, they have heavy mining lasers and spotters for ballistic skill 3+, and they can scout an impressive 9 inches. That, in addition to their 12-inch move, they travel 21 inches before shooting from an angle your opponent did not expect to be shot from. So if the 2 Ridgerunners with their D3 shots at strength 12, AP -4 mining lasers with crossfire, hitting on a 3+, ignoring cover, and doing D6 +1 damage was not enough, then the Purestrains go in with their boosted AP -3 claws to remove the last few wounds. If you want to figure out which tanks and monsters that could kill, or if your favourite Basilisk or Baneblade would survive, or if having 1 miracle dice of a 6 can save your Exorcist, or if you need at least 2 that you would get from the detachment rule of the Army of Faith, all of that can be figured out with today's sponsor, the Adept Roll Math Hammer app. Adept Roll is a free-to-use, simple-to-use app for iOS and Android. It lets you quickly run simulations for any Warhammer 40k unit, even homebrewed units. It's so quick it could theoretically be done mid-game while your opponent is moving closer to you, so you can figure out before they shoot if Armor of Contempt will be useful or if it is necessary for survival. The app has been updated and now has Battlescribe direct import for weapons and stats, so you don't need to manually input the Baneblade profile, they can be selected and brought over really quickly. For example here, I've imported the Ridgerunner cannon, modified it for the spotter and crossfire, and updated it to represent 2 of them firing at once, and selected a defender profile to match a Leman Russ tank. With one tap, Adept Roll calculates everything and provides a range of detailed stats to help you find out how maimed the guard tank is. The app helps new players get a grasp of the damage their units can output, and lets veteran players prep for known competitive combinations. The link to download it is in the description and as a pinned comment. The only detachment not doing so well in the meta is the Brood Brothers. You don't get to take advantage of the more cheap units of the Genestealer Cult if you are still taking about 50% Kazakin, Sentinels, and Shadow Swords. The points drop to heavy weapons teams was nice for more las cannons and mortars, but this detachment has the worst and least usable stratagems. It's a detachment that's trying to get the big guns of the Imperial Guard and the Ridgerunners to do a lot of heavy lifting, and then try and synergize with the Genestealer Cult shooting, which is probably the weakest part of the Genestealer Cult. We have great movement, we have pretty decent combat, our shooting tends to leave a lot to be desired. If this meta information has been useful so far, I do talk about Genestealers quite a lot, so please click the subscribe button. It is a free button click that marks me as someone you want to see more from, especially Genestealer Cult related videos. And one reason to subscribe is to know about future giveaways that are running. The last one was 2 weeks ago for the Ordo Hereticus Battle Force box. That has been won by Blaine from Calgary, Alberta. I have sent them a congratulations message, but thank you to everyone who entered. Remember that the box is still available to purchase in many places, from Fenris Workshop in Canada, who kindly ran the giveaway. It is still available to purchase at 15% off, while Fenris Workshop has 10% off most other Games Workshop products. If you want other Warhammer supplies like Genestealer Cult models, Wargames Portal in the United States has 10% off Genestealer Cult models. Gap Games in Australia and New Zealand has 21% off that really helps to offset the high price of Warhammer in those countries. Not that you can't get it cheaper in the UK, the home of Games Workshop. Firestorm Games still has the Imperial Agents Battle Force Ordo Hereticus in stock, and for 20% off, while I offer 12% off most other Games Workshop products. So now we come to the part where we need to think about what is going to happen to Cult Ambush specifically. So option A was that there is no real change to Cult Ambush, just that the October FAQs and such go into the core part of the rule. It would be a general tidy up of how it works. Or it may just be that, yeah, Cult Ambush is now Deep Strike. That would get rid of a lot of the, oh, it's like Deep Strike but not Deep Strike, and it makes it clear how tunnel crawlers should work. You don't need an FAQ to say, yeah, despite not being Deep Strike, you can use this even though it specifies using Deep Strike, because Cult Ambush is just Deep Strike. This means we would just continue as we are, which isn't the best. And the points going down temporarily is what I think Games Workshop's done in preparation for making the rule different, noticeably different. And then the points on the units will be rebalanced in preparation for what they predict will be the effect of the new Cult Ambush rule. Right now we still have really weird situations going on. Like, because you can Deep Strike from Cult Ambush, 10 Acolytes could be killed in your movement phase through Overwatch. If you pass the Cult Ambush roll, the unit comes back at the end of the same movement phase, potentially in the same spot. They could even come back closer to the enemy than before because of tunnel crawlers. And I don't know if this situation was intentional. This is very much the, we're not going to do much in our rework of Cult Ambush. But we haven't got much to work with so far with the Cult Ambush mechanics change, as they've stated. So option B is another minor rules change to how Cult Ambush works. We still have Cult Ambush tokens, we still have Deep Strike, but there will be some extra part, maybe to make the units returning more reliable. So you may be allowed 1 unit back per battle round. Or it could be like Age of Sigmar's undead factions have done in the past. Every time you lose a unit, you get a half-sized unit back, but the small 5-man units don't come back at all. Or it could be like a token stacking modifier. +1 to pass a test for each failed Cult Ambush test until you pass a Cult Ambush test, then it resets back to 5+. The challenge for Genestealer Cult players then is to have a big unit die at the right time to take advantage of the bonuses, before some small 5-man Acolyte unit comes back instead. Or we could have it that when you pass a Cult Ambush roll, and it could start at 6+ before you get the modifiers, then you get to bring back a single unit of your choice that was destroyed earlier in the battle. So that would be a way of tweaking a certain part of the Cult Ambush rule. But that doesn't affect a lot of what is wrong with the codex at the moment, because it all relies on how the Cult Ambush rule was written when the codex came out. If Deep Strike is still an option for us, then we need to rework the codex because so much of the codex struggles to work properly with a Deep Strike bypass to just using the Cult Ambush markers. But we're now in Category C, a full rework of the codex rules, and I think it's the most needed even if Games Workshop goes with option B instead. They should pick option C. The Jackal Bikers are the only unit that has Cult Ambush that doesn't also have Deep Strike. They need the Cult Ambush markers because they arrive 9 inches from a board edge and touching a Cult Ambush marker. They're not just coming on from strategic reserves from a board edge. It has to be the tokens or Deep Strike. As the only unit that needs the Cult Ambush markers, they could just be given the Deep Strike rule to ride out of a secret tunnel or have hidden warriors pull some tarpaulin off a bike rack. Getting rid of the Cult Ambush token part of Cult Ambush is one way of changing up the Cult Ambush rule. Just give the Jackal Bikers Deep Strike and then it will work. This edition didn't have little tokens provided in the codex so that you have Cult Ambush markers. We just have the suggestion of using a 32mm base. Okay, so if in any part we are keeping the Deep Strike, the stratagems need to be updated to work with Deep Strike being part of Cult Ambush. The Xenocreed detachment has an utterly pointless stratagem, the Downtrodden Rise. Why would you pay 2 command points? And what does it do? You don't get a unit back that you failed a Cult Ambush test with, that would be a rework for it. It lets you deploy a unit even if there are no Cult Ambush tokens on the board. But right now, you don't need a Cult Ambush token to use the Deep Strike part. Why would you want to come on 9 inches from a table edge, more than 9 inches from your opponent, and not within their deployment zone, when right now, for free, we can come back anywhere on the board, not within 9 inches of the enemy, without restrictions on being in the enemy deployment zone or having to be near a table edge. That stratagem just needs replacing with something else. And we see the same thing in the other detachments. In the Biosanctic Broodsurge, the Evasive Vanguard stratagem lets you move a Cult Ambush marker with Purestrains beneath it. I don't see a reason to save a cult ambush marker when those same Purestrains could deep strike onto the board. If the enemy is just over 9 inches from your rapid ingress token, they're probably going to be able to shoot you if you deploy immediately from that token. It's something you could do, but it's a really unusual situation where you'd want to do that. This is a dud stratagem. In the Brood Brothers Auxilia, we have In the Shadow of Iron. You lose a cult ambush marker, so you pay a command point to put it near a vehicle. But unless you really need more neophytes on a vehicle right now, you would just wait till your next turn and deep strike with them. The only reason you'd want to save a cult ambush marker in that detachment is for the separate stratagem, Regimental Reinforcements, 1 command point to bring back a Brood Brothers unit from cult ambush. But it only works on a 3+, and it's only once per game, and it does require a cult ambush marker. It's a shame you have to roll a 3+ to have it work, but that is about the only stratagem that requires the cult ambush markers. So there needs to be a stratagem rework if we're keeping the deep strike part of cult ambush. These stratagems could be changed to be a universal stratagem across the detachments, like the Space Marines have Armor of Contempt across their detachments. It could be, for 2 command points, when a unit dies, you are guaranteed that it gets placed into cult ambush without having to roll a dice. I think people would appreciate that as a stratagem. If Games Workshop wanted, it could be specialized to each detachment, so the Xenocreed could only use it on a Neophyte, Acolyte or Metamorph squad. In the Biosanctic Broodsurge, if it's going to replace Evasive Vanguard, still call it Evasive Vanguard, and it only works on Purestrains. There are units in this codex that also need reworking when Deep Strike is an option to bypass the cult ambush markers. There is so little incentive to take the Nexus. As a character that gives -1 cost to command points, they cost more than their equivalent in many factions and with a worse profile. Their other ability is to move around cult ambush markers to keep them safe from your opponent, or move them closer to opponents in preparation for an attack. But there is little incentive to protect those markers when the loss of a token is not the loss of a unit. It can still turn up by Deep Strike, unless it is the token for a Jackal Biker unit near a board edge. The Nexus was mandatory in the Index, but near redundant currently. That's just how the meta goes, unless you rework the Nexus. I really think that their -1 command point ability should be swapped with the Primuses, Decoys and Misdirection ability. It suits the man at the table organizing the grand strategy. Then a lone Nexus could still have purpose and be a useful utility man. It gives them a role in the army, at least completing primary and secondary missions, until they inevitably get easily murdered. There are other units like the Icon Ward, but you get the point. If cult ambush markers are not valuable, any abilities that protect the cult ambush markers are a waste of text. So unless Games Workshop makes the cult ambush tokens the only way to return units, they're gonna have to replace these abilities. Maybe they should do both. A Nexus giving you 2 cult ambush markers instead of 1 as long as he's on the table. And technically, he's always on the table if you look at the model. So that is a rework if they keep the main part of Cult Ambush, that its purpose is to recycle units. After this many tries to get the Cult Ambush rule to have flavor and balance, it could be abandoned and a new rule put in place. The Cult of Ascension detachment rule could become the army rule, as that works on all our units, shooting and combat, that come from Deep Strike, and it encourages you to use the Deep Strike aspect that a lot of our units have. We could instead have the Brood Brothers detachment rule as the army rule, and show that having multiple units attack the same enemy as an ambush-style army, the second and any subsequent units get +1 to hit. Or we have seen that the Ridgerunner is a really key part of the army to make the Genestealer Cult function on the table. So have the Ridgerunner Crossfire rule act as the army rule. No longer do we have waves of cultists throwing themselves at the enemy. Instead, we emphasize the targeted attacks, taking down our choice of enemies in a coordinated strike. In shooting or combat, after one of our Genestealer Cult units attacks an enemy, for the rest of the phase, any Genestealer Cult or Brood Brothers unit that attacks that same enemy gets +1 AP. And it's called Crossfire, so people who played in 9th edition can feel happy about it, without needing all of the tables and the lines and drawing pictures across the map. But Games Workshop could do the simpler options option A or option B, and leave the abilities and stratagems as deadweight legacy rules that had value, limited value, for about a month after the codex released. I have a lot more to say about how else we can fix the Genestealer Cult codex, but I saved that for another video for you to click here. The Genestealer Cult are not the only ones getting a rework in December. There will be a change to Miracle Dice and a change to the Death Watch, with what could be coming explained in this video. My darlings and viewers, have a great day of 40k.